Well, if you will, pull out your teaching notes. We're looking at part 3 of our series, Enough. And we're talking about the secret of a happy life. We're going to learn that happiness is actually not something out there, some way that you can get if certain circumstances fall into place. But you're going to learn that happiness is a choice. I found something, we were doing a little work on our house, and this is, anybody know what this is? It is a carbon monoxide monitor. And if you push it and test it, it beeps. At least it beeped earlier today. Battery may be dead. And what I want to talk about is a silent assassin. Thousands of people die every year because of carbon monoxide. We plug this into our house, and if there's carbon monoxide, it will start beeping. It's interesting, the reason so many people die is the symptoms are so normal. If you have a leak in your house someplace, usually it's fatigue, nausea, it seems like the flu. People think nothing's really wrong. If you're sleeping and there's a big leak of carbon monoxide, you breathe in carbon monoxide, and what it does, it actually replaces the oxygen. So you continue to breathe like normal, and then instead of the cell getting oxygen, it gets carbon monoxide, and then it starves the cell, and then what it does, it one by one shuts down your organs. You never know what hits you. You cannot see it, you cannot taste it, you cannot smell it. It's completely silent. If you have low grades of it, it will cause brain damage, it causes cognitive damage, it will affect people's memories, certain organ damage, but it is completely silent. And so unless you have some sort of device to let you know that there's a leak, that there's some carbon monoxide, it will impact you and make you sick or kill you. And everything will seem exactly normal. In fact, little leaks will be like, I'm just a little tired today, or, all the research says, I just think I have the flu. Now, here's my point. What if there is something that's a silent assassin in our spiritual life? What if there is something that seems so normal and you can't taste it and you can't smell it and you can't see it, but it will do the same thing to your soul? It'll destroy your family, it'll destroy your marriage, it'll destroy your soul, it'll destroy your finances, it'll destroy your relationships, it'll absolutely ruin every area of your life, but it's absolutely so normal and so common and so subtle that most people, including followers of Jesus, never recognize the silent assassin. So what you need and what I need is sort of the spiritual equivalent of one of these, so a little light will go off. And the Apostle Paul gives us that in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 5. And he says there's a silent assassin. He says, false teachers produce these men of corrupt minds who've been robbed of the truth, who think that godliness is a means to financial gain. That's the context. This may be hard to believe, but even in Paul's day, there were people preaching that walking with God, following God closely, that's the way to get rich. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Literally, that's our word. Happiness, purpose, self-sufficiency, peace. For we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Literally, the word for clothing is covering. If you have a covering for your body, it could be a tent, it could be a hut, it could be a mansion. But if you have a covering for you and clothes to wear and food, the Apostle Paul says, the Spirit of God in your relationship with Christ, you can be happy. And believe me, I've been all around the world and I've seen that to be true. And then he says, here's the silent assassin. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. The reason, for the love of money is, and you might underline a root, it's not the root, is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So who is this silent assassin? Who's the foe? The technical name in the New Testament is Philogoria. If you want to jot that down, You can just make it phonetic. It's a Greek word. Philo, like Philadelphia, it means love. Goria, it means greed. The phrase for the love of money, the phrase those who are eager to get rich, that's this word, philogoria. We would probably call it materialism, the consumer mindset. I got to have more. It's got to be bigger. It's got to be better. It's this moving horizon that the love of money, the desire, the passion, thinking wealth will deliver security and significance and purpose. Philogoria. Well, how formidable is our foe? You might look at the word, circle the word plunge, circle the word ruin, circle the word a root of all kinds of evil, circle the word wandered, circle the word pierced, and circle the word griefs. I mean, those are strong. They plunge men into trouble. They produce grief. They pierce your life. They ruin relationships. They destroy things. This passion, this false belief system that money can deliver. What are the tactics? You can put a box around temptation, put a box around trap, put a box around foolish, and then put a box around harmful desires. A temptation is something promises to give you a good thing in a bad way. Temptation is God says this is the path. A temptation is, no, take this path. It's shorter and it's easier. The word for trap here is a word used, it's a fishing word. It's the picture of that glittering lure that's bright and shiny, and the fish comes up to it and it grabs it, and once it grabs the shiny part, there's a hook, and it gets caught deep in its mouth. And then as it pulls, it goes down in and sucks it in. That's this word. It says the love of money is a temptation. There's a shortcut. Peace is that way. Prosperity is that way. Fun is that way. Purpose is that way. Significance is that way. Money will deliver. Just work harder. Just get more. Get the big deal. Major in this, even if you don't like it, because that kind of job will bring you money, and money will bring success, and success will bring happiness. He says it's a silent assassin. It's a temptation. It creates foolish and harmful desires. Desires that we all recognize, like, you know what, if you get a new house today, 3 years from now, you're looking at, that one's a little bit better. It's kind of like the new car smell. It just goes away quickly. All of us, how many of us have multiple products from the same company? This one came out, and then they revised it, and then they revised it, and they revised it. I think I've put some companies in business for a while. It's this belief system that more, bigger, better, much will bring security, significance, and purpose. Finally, it says, what are the tactics? And notice it's through deception, through lies. It's a root of all kinds of evil. Eager for money, they have wandered, pierced, and griefed. It's subtle. It's deception. The word wander here, it's very interesting. It's in what's called the passive tense. It's not like you wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to make money and my job and my focus and all that I am about money instead of the people that matter most. No one wakes up and does that. It's a picture of like two people being in a boat and talking, and they pull up the oars, and they don't take notice of the current. And they want to be right in front of the dock here, and they talk for 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 minutes, and then they both look up, and the current of the stream has them 2 miles from where they were. When the love of money, when philogoria, when consumerism strangles you and strangles me, the last person to know it is us. By the way, it's tasteless, it's odorless. And since other people have the same disease, it seems normal. Stress seems normal. Lots of debt seems normal. Pressure seems normal. Crazy hours seems normal. Workaholism seems normal. It's just the Silicon Valley way. Jesus said, it's the deceitfulness of riches that choke out the truth of God's word and the power that brings about life and peace and all the things that we thought it'll deliver: love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, relationships, self-control. All those qualities that make for great relationships, it begins to choke out. If you want to be happy, I mean really happy, content, at peace, settled in purpose, joy in your heart regardless of your circumstances being up or down, because you're human and the world's crazy. Sometimes they'll be up and sometimes they'll be down, right? The Apostle Paul is going to teach us how you can make very specific choices to be happy. Open your notes and let's look at what he says in terms of how do we break the grip of greed in our life. How do you break that? It's powerful. I mean, it's really powerful. You'll notice from our last time together in Philippians, the Philippians model this. By way of review, he's writing a thank you letter. They've given a financial gift to help him. It's been about 10 years, and they've helped him a number of times. And the book of Philippians is really a thank you note to a group of people that he loves, that he's super tight with. And so he says, I greatly rejoice in the Lord that at last you've renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need. And then notice we studied this. I have learned. Remember that? You can actually learn. He learned like riding a bike learned. I mean, I know how to do this. I've got it down. I've learned to be content with whatever the circumstance. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content or literally happy in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Now here's the deal. He's going to tell us, like if you were learning to ride a bike or if you're learning to use a software or you're learning to do something, there's usually some skills and you practice these skills. And after you practice those skills over a period of time, you learn. And he's going to give us in this Philippian model 3 very specific skills that you can learn, that you'll start and take baby steps with, and then you'll practice. And as you practice these, you can be happy. You can be happy when your 401k skyrockets and your stocks go up. You can be happy when you're in a season that's just normal but difficult in your marriage. You can be happy single. You can be happy as a single parent. You can be happy when you lose your job. I'm not saying you're excited about it, but you can have peace and purpose and direction. And the world no longer can dictate to you the joy and the happiness in your life. But he says this is not automatic. And just because you know Christ personally, it's not automatic. Through the Philippian letter, he's going to give 3 specific skills. Skill number 1 is you have to develop personal compassion by putting others' needs ahead of our wants. You have to develop personal compassion. Compassion isn't empathy. Empathy is I feel for you. Compassion is, the word is splachna in the New Testament. It comes from down in the gut or literally the bowels. It's seeing another person's need and something visceral happens in you that you just can't keep living the same way unless you take some sort of step to meet that need. We had compassion on a school. We didn't feel bad for their bad facility. We didn't talk to one another about how shabby it looked. We didn't say someday, some way, someone ought to do something. We didn't, give them a few $1,000s and say good luck. We had compassion. We spent time and energy, thousands of dollars. We have lots of wants that we could have probably improved around here, but instead we met a need. Notice what the Apostle Paul says to the Philippian church. He says, yet it was good of you to share in my trouble. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, I set out from Macedonia, that was where Philippi was, and not one church shared or partnered with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you. You might put a little underline where it says, where it was good, literally the word, it was beautiful. That's why we sang that song. He said it was beautiful, it was noble, it was winsome. You koinonia'd. That's the word. You shared, we connected with my trouble. And the word trouble here is a technical word in the New Testament for the affliction or the difficulty that can come on a person's life for sharing the gospel. And Paul is saying it was a beautiful thing, your generosity in the midst of these prisons, in the midst of getting beaten up, in the midst of all that I've gone through, of all the other churches, you're the only church that said, you know what, Paul, we want to financially support you so you don't have to make quite so many tents, because that was his sort of day job, so that you could preach the gospel and make disciples. And so he says to them, you know, you help me. They put his need ahead of their wants. And honestly, it was a church that was really poor. And yet they did it sacrificially. When you talk about generosity, I think most of us have thoughts like this. You know what? If I ever had a lot of money, I would be generous. I mean, I would love to be generous. I'd like to really help people, but, you know, I really can't right now. But someday, some way, or if I was super holy, you know, like Billy Graham or Mother Teresa or whoever you think is holy, now maybe they can be generous, but, you know, right now I'm just doing what I can. My journey of generosity started with a bricklayer and his family that I watched them in their time and their energy. I ate with them. I watched them give money they didn't have to help people and help students. And then when I got to seminary, I had an interesting experience. We were living on under $1,000 a month for a family of 5. And I know $1,000 went a little farther, but believe me, that's not a lot of money. And so I was working full-time, going to school full-time, and we probably had meat maybe twice or 3 times a month. We could put $15 in a co-op, and we would go downtown to the farmer's market, and we were with about 12 other couples, and we get 3 or 4 big bags of fruits and vegetables. And Teresa would bake bread, and I had a peanut butter and honey sandwich on whole wheat bread that she made every single day for 4 years, as did my kids. And they had water in their thermoses. So we didn't have anything. And so this guy comes to a chapel at seminary, and I think he was from Compassion or World Vision, and, you know, he shows all the stories of all these kids, and, you know, my heart's going out to him, and, you know, I'm kind of tearing up, and I'm sitting there thinking, I really wish I could help them, but I can't make it here. And then he said something really crazy. He said, you know something, a lot of you are wondering, why would I come to a seminary? There was about 1,000 students in the chapel. And he said, why would I come to a place like this? You know, most of you don't have any money, you're trying to get through school, you have kids, you're working 2 jobs. And then he showed a couple pictures. And then he said, how many of you, even as poor as you are, could go out to dinner, even somewhere, even if it's Burger King or McDonald's, only 18 or 20 bucks? How many of you do that at least once or maybe twice a month? 90% of the hands go up. And then he put a picture up. He said, here's all I'm saying. Would you be willing to eat McDonald's or Burger King or wherever you go one less time to feed that kid for a month and give him an education and him hear the gospel? And I thought, yes, I would do that. I'll never forget, I remember bringing that little kid's picture home and explaining to Teresa how we were going to renegotiate our budget. And that was only like $18 a month, but we didn't have $18 a month. And I'm not sure we necessarily did it. We just put it in our budget. But it was one of the early times of saying, I'm going to put someone else's needs ahead of my wants, and I'm going to trust God He's going to take care of me. And all I can tell you, that was a baby step. You may not be a big deal, but maybe some of you have never done something like that. Those are the steps. Well, 30 years later, I remember realizing my heart was I was reading the passages about orphans, and I realized my heart I wasn't concerned about the poor. I mean, I said I was, and our church helped people, but personally, I wasn't doing much. And so I knew a guy that was helping, so Teresa and I gave a couple $100 to this ministry in Africa. And he was a close friend. I knew where it went. And then I was down there doing some other ministry a few years later, and so I went and I visited all these orphans. And you know, just another year or so later, we started giving several $100s a month to orphans. I mean, that's over and above, you know, what we give to the church and, you know, Faith Promise and things. But I look back and I realize, you know where that started? That started with a little baby step of giving $18 I didn't have, thinking we might miss a few Happy Meals. That's how your heart of compassion grows. Remember what John said last week? Wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart follows. All I knew is I didn't care very much about orphans, and I didn't care very much about compassion kids. But when compared to like 3 Happy Meals, it was like, what am I going to do? That began to tenderize my heart. See, what philogoria does is it hardens your heart and it begins to warp your mind. And it warps your mind about what you need. And what happens is things that you want that were 5 years ago a luxury, it's a need now. You have to have a big TV. You have to have the latest phone. You have to have the latest clothes. And by the way, all these advertisements, you have to change colors, right? I mean, like skirts are short, they're in, get rid of the old ones. 2 years later, they're long, get rid of the short ones. I mean, lime is the color of the year. No, it's pink this year. So we have all these closets full of stuff and all these shoes that we don't wear because we've been told it's not in, it's not cool. Why? Philogoria. We just have a culture. Our mind and the world system is sucking us into believing you don't look good, you don't look cool unless you have, wear, drive. Now we can't, remember the day when people actually, if you wanted to buy something, they gave you a price tag? Have you noticed in car commercials, they don't tell you what cars cost anymore? Why? Because very few people buy them. What do they tell you? How much a month for how many years? So now I have my house on time, either rent. Now I have my car. Now I have this. I can go to rooms to go, and I won't have to pay anything for 2 years, just all the interest. And so what happens, we become prisoners. And all of a sudden, our wants now become needs, and now we're trapped. And we say, I would love to be compassionate, but I just can't. And so what happens is, Jesus said, it's the deceitfulness of riches. It chokes the word or the truth out of our heart. And when I'm not compassionate, when I don't see people the way Jesus sees them, when I don't love people, and by the way, you can give to people with a hard heart and not love, but you cannot love without giving. Giving is the proof of our love for people. Giving of your time, giving of your energy, giving of your thoughts, giving of your money. And so we have to break greed, we've got to develop a heart of compassion. The second skill is to develop a generous spirit. And we develop a generous spirit by releasing the very thing that has the power to consume us. Jesus talked more about giving or money than heaven and hell combined. And by the way, I mean, he wasn't flying in a jet. He didn't have a big house. He wasn't asking for himself. You might jot this down. Giving is the antidote to greed. Greed will have its claws around your neck unless you learn to give. It breaks the power of it. And that's why he talks so much. To Jesus, our giving and money was linked to our heart. And so he talked about something that you could see very easily so we could understand where our heart is. You know what? I can't taste, I can't smell, I can't see. But the other day, I got it to work. And this thing, easy. This thing, we put it in a drawer. And we had this beeping like that for like 2 days. And we couldn't figure out where it was. Everywhere, it's just beeping. And honestly, what Jesus said is if you just look at your finances, they beep. And if you're honest and if you look at them, they'll beep and tell you exactly where you're at spiritually, where your heart's at, what's going on in your life. And so he says it's one thing for us to develop a heart of compassion that we really care, but then you want to develop a generous spirit. And don't think just money, and don't think just giving to the church. I mean a generous spirit. A generous spirit is releasing the very thing that has the power to consume you. Notice the Philippian church. For even when I was in Thessalonica, that's a port city. That's a wealthy city. I mean, Paul's saying, I was doing ministry. They weren't mature enough to give. I was in a pretty ritzy place sharing the gospel. Even when I was there, notice what the Philippians did. You sent me aid. Notice it was regular. Again and again when I was in need. See, when Jesus talks about the word getting choked, the antidote to that is you can't allow yourself to be deceived by riches. And the definition of deception is you don't know what's happening. See, when it's happening to everyone, when everyone you know has lots of consumer debt, When everyone you know says, I'd like to give, I'd like to be generous, but I just can't because, well, then we're deceived. And so he says, release the very thing that can consume you. Notice there's a regular pattern again and again. Giving is like a muscle that has to be developed, and it's very unnatural. At least it was for me. I remember the very first time I went to a conference, and it was with a parachurch group. And I grew up sort of in church before I sort of got out of that. I'd give a quarter, or sometimes my mom would give me $1, and I'd put it in a little bag, but I made no connection. Sometimes when I felt real close to God, I'd put like $5 in college, or like if I felt like I really messed up, I'd give 20. Maybe that'll get me some bonus points up there. And I had a completely warped view of how giving related to our heart and to our worship. And I was at this conference, and there was a couple that were going to Japan, and they needed some money to get there. And I listened to them, and they were really real people. And they said it was like way less than 1% of the whole country knew about Christ and knew about his love and had a relationship with him. And it wasn't like I think I helped them a lot, but I cannot tell you, I gave regularly $5 a month for a few years, but it cultivated and developed something I'd never done before, thinking about someone other than myself. And, college, I didn't have much money. And believe me, $5 is a lot more than it is now. But it doesn't sound like much, but it was a step. 50% of all the people in all the churches in America go to church, and when they go, this is what they give. 0. And I'm sure some feel like, well, I can't give a lot, so it won't make a difference. Here's what you need to understand. Giving, generosity, is primarily not about the people who get it. It's primarily about the need for our hearts to give it. It's a practice. It begins to get that mine. I got to protect it. It's all mine. I was trying to figure out how this deception works and how, in a way, I could share this with you where, I don't know about you, but my church experiences were really, really bad growing up. And the only time anyone ever talked about money was when, you felt guilty and they were banging you for it and, do this and do that. It was really messed up. And so I had this warped view of money and giving, and it wasn't the New Testament. And by the way, you can check your bulletin. We're doing fine financially. At the end of this message, there's not going to be, oh, by the way, here's a new project. And none of that's happening. This is about you. This is about your heart. This is about you learning to be content and being happy. And I was praying, I was thinking, God, how could I help me and the rest of our church just see how warped and deceived we can get without even knowing it? So here's a little survey. And if you don't mind, could you raise your hand? Because there's nothing, this will not be, you won't feel, I'm not going to have you raise your hand and go, ha, 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 ha. Okay, I won't do one of those. But when you go to a restaurant, how many of you leave a tip of any kind? Okay, if it's super terrible and they cuss you out, I've had options where I didn't, but normally. How many of you at normal restaurant, the service is good, leave 5%? Okay, not very many. Used to be 10%. How many leave 10%? Wow, you're a generous group. We've got a handful of people, 10%ers. How many leave 15% or more? Okay, but 90-some%. Okay, now here's the deal. Do you have to leave a tip? If you would eat a dinner and walk out of there and you don't leave a tip at all, is like the tip police come in, oh, okay, right here, buddy, spread them. Do you get hurt? Do they say you can never come back here again? Or is it voluntary? It's voluntary. So 90-some% of you, when you go and eat a meal, there is a waiter or a waitress that you don't have to say thank you and be generous with, but 90-some% of you do. Now, I'm sure, so why? I'm not sure of all the reasons. There's probably some level of peer pressure, I don't want to be seen as a miserly jerk. Maybe that's part of it. Or how about, I just, this person, waiters and waitresses, they don't pay them hardly anything. If you don't give them a tip, they're in bad shape, right? You want to help them. So you want to help them, or you might be embarrassed, or it's sort of a habit that you just have, right? Here's how deception can happen. Isn't it amazing that 90-some% of the people in this room voluntarily give 15% over and above whatever their meal was? And yet nationwide, only 2.7% of followers of Jesus give the first 10% of their income to God. And now I'd like to say that that's in the world, but our church is different. No, our church is not different. Half of the people that come to our church don't give anything. Probably 10, 12, 13% give a tithe, sort of the beginning steps that God talks about before there was ever a law. Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek. And then in the law, it was really a theocracy. So you tithed on this, you tithed on that. You gave about 23% of your income. But that wasn't just for giving. That was for the priest and the whole deal. And then afterwards, when Jesus taught, he said to the Pharisees, you gave this 10% beginning. And then in the New Testament, we'll talk about a little bit later, it's proportional giving. We're to give as we're blessed. And by the way, if you feel a little like, yeah, that's probably not all bad. But would anybody here say, I really love waiters and waitresses more than the God who created the world, who made me, who sent his son, who died for me, who placed his spirit in me, who deposited spiritual gifts in me, who gave me purpose for my life, who is currently preparing a place for me in heaven, and has used me and brought me joy and life. Now, would anyone say that you love a waitress or a waiter more than God? No, right? But what's your behavior say? Do you understand when he says they have wandered, they have pierced, they have, and I think everybody here, here's the deception, I think everyone here in your heart of hearts would say, well, if I had more, I want to give, I just can't. I mean, that's where I was. But, so the deception is it's priorities. It's what's first. It's who do you trust? And the whole point of money to Jesus in a generous spirit is that it creates this habit and this view of caring for others, because left to ourselves, we start to protect and secure, and unconsciously, we think these other things are going to make us happy. And a lot of the stuff you have, do you realize that 20 years ago, there was hardly any of these storage places? The whole storage, and what's everyone's garage? Most garages are filled not with cars, right? What are they filled with? The stuff you don't need anymore. So our garages and all these storage units all over the place, and now they got to be climatized because we're not sure if we're ever going to use it, but we don't want it to be ruined. All I'm saying is, I think this is true. I think the glitter and the hook, but here's why. 60-some% of all marriages fail because of financial pressure. When Jesus tells us to be compassionate and generous, to give first, to limit debt to only appreciable items, to be wise with our money. If you can't afford it, don't buy it. Save up until you can. Some of those really old traditional things are just biblical. What they do is they free you and they allow you to express your love to people. And by the way, I think this is more than just, our first giving to the church, although that's important. I think this is a journey. And for me, it started with just $5 over here. And yes, I learned to give the first 10%. And then the third step, I learned something from a very wise man that really challenged me. The third step is to develop an eternal perspective by understanding the inseparable relationship between our money and authentic worship. See, I want to develop a heart of compassion. I want to develop a spirit of generosity. I want to go places and look at people. I actually do something. I would encourage you to try this because this is a baby step. And maybe if you're in high school or college, you don't have much money, maybe a wad of 8 or 10 ones. If you're a little bit older and have a little bit more money, a wad of 6 or 7 or 8 $5 bills or tens. And this is, you keep it with you just to give. You just keep it with you all the time. For some of you, it's a wad of, maybe 8 or 10 $20 bills. And you just keep it with you and you're looking for... I was in the Chicago airport, and there was a guy that I could tell whose life was hard, and he was cleaning the bathrooms. And he was from another country, and his countenance was down. And and God just prompted me. And so I do that, and I went over and I said, I just want you to know that God knows your life, and he cares about you. And I gave him a $20 bill. And he just lit up. I don't know what it did for him. I know what it did for me. I found myself at a car wash recently with a bunch of Vietnam guys, and you could tell, they were pretty new here, and 2 of them didn't speak the language, and the one guy was leading everything, and I just watched all these cars coming through and all this work, and I thought, what would it be like to living here, not speak the language, be new? And you know what? They washed my car, and then I gave them a tip that was more than the price of the car wash. And then I asked them about, so have you guys found a church? And well, I'm Catholic, and these 2 guys are Buddhist, but... Do you understand what I'm saying? For some of you, I did this when someone gave me some money I didn't expect. Some of you should have like 8 or 10 $100 bills that you carry with you in your briefcase or in the back of your purse. So if you see a need, that you can what it does, it sort of triggers you to be prepared to be a generous person. I will tell you, your eyes will change. Your joy will change. Your happiness will change. See, what happens is your focus instead, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? What about this? Do I want this? Do I have that? It changes to, God, everything that I am and everything that I have is from you. And I'm going to give first and foremost to your work. And then I don't want generosity to be like, I don't want to write a check to the church like a bill. I want to make it an offering to my God. And then I want him to know that all the rest of my money, it's his as well. And God, if you want to whisper in my ear and you want to love people in ways that I don't know about, I just want you to know I'm prepared and ready. All I can tell you, it's one of the greatest joys of my life. And we can all do it at different levels, and it's not the amount of the money, it creates that mindset. It's understanding this relationship between money and authentic worship. Notice what Paul says. He wants to make sure they get the motives right. He goes, not that I'm looking for a gift. He says, I'm writing this thank you letter, but this isn't like, thank you for the last gift, and by the way, I need another big one. He said, no. But I'm looking for what may be credited to your account. It's a very interesting, it's a financial phrase or term. And it's really the interest that is being accrued on your account in heaven. Paul actually believed in eternal rewards. He says, I'm not thanking you just for me. I'm looking for what is credited to your account. I've received full payment. Literally, I've got a receipt. And even more, I'm amply supplied. You've given generously through the gift from Epaphroditus. And then notice, giving. And then here's you might jot this down. Every financial decision is a spiritual decision. Every financial decision is a spiritual decision. Their gift accrued in heaven, but notice the language changes from the gift, the interest, and the receipt. Now notice how he describes it. They are a fragrant offering. Literally the phrase is, it's a sweet smell in the nostrils of God. It's an acceptable, notice, sacrifice. It's not what we have left over. It's our best. It's our first. It's pleasing to God. God does more for the giver eternally and spiritually than the receiver of the gift. That's what he's saying. The last words of Jesus are not in Matthew, they're not in Mark, they're not in Luke, and they're not in John. Did you know that? The last words of Jesus are him being quoted in the book of Acts, where the apostle would say to others, now remember the words of our Lord, that it's more blessed. The word means happy. It's more blessed to give than to receive. All I want to tell you is we don't believe that. Philogoria robs us of that. Philogoria begins to harden your heart. Philogoria begins to sort of suffocate your spirit. It's like breathing in CO2, and right where the oxygen should go and then go and give life to the organs, the CO2 locks in the carbon monoxide, and what it does is it doesn't deliver anything. It smells the same, it looks the same, it goes into your cells, but it brings death. That's what materialism does. That's what greed does. That's what consumerism does. It's lethal. It plunges men and women into ruin and destruction. I had an experience with an older gentleman. His name was Paul. And Paul grew up in Midwest. Paul was a business guy, was an architect early on, and then became an architect for some commercial buildings, and he learned from that he really liked that better. And Paul got married and was young and came from sort of a traditional home where, giving 10% to the Lord, that's what the Bible says. You give the first 10%. And he said, it was like a bill. You just write it out and it honors God and positions you to be blessed, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I went to a conference on generosity and they talked about proportional giving. They said, that's a good start, and that's, you give the first 10% to recognize it all comes from God. And by the way, how we use the other 90% if you tithe is just as important. But he said they were talking about when God blesses you more, you should learn to be more generous. And so he said, I was married for a year, and I went to my young bride, and I said, why don't we do an experiment? Why don't we give 11% this year? And she said, well, okay, let's test the Lord. So he gave 11% and got to the end of the year, and he thought, well, nothing broke. In fact, we made a little bit more money this year than last year. And so, well, what do you think, dear? Let's do 12% the next year. And you could probably wonder where this story is going. I met Paul when he'd been married 58 years. For 58 years, Paul added a percentage. And he said, please do not hear this is no give to get. And I'm not saying God does this. I've just never had a year where I made less the next year than I did the past year. When I met Paul, he was giving, 72, 73% of his income away and lived a great life. But it was very interesting, and he was a very old man as I got to know him, and he sort of had, some guys, when they get like really old and they sort of get that, when they talk, and Paul would get up and goes, let me tell you young people something. I believe that the Word of God is true, and I send mine to the royal bank of heaven. He said, I can spend money on all kind of things here. And Paul had a nice house, and he had a lake house, and he drove a nice car. Paul enjoyed life. But he said, I believe heaven's real. Why would I invest money here where it's not going to go anywhere instead of the royal bank of heaven where I get 30, 60, 100-fold interest? He was a business guy. He goes, that's a good investment. You know what I learned from Paul? Paul actually believed in heaven. Most Christians do intellectually, but not practically. He actually believed there's a place that will be forever. He actually believed that in this place that will be forever, that we can store up treasure for ourselves, and that it is totally by grace that we will go to heaven. But the qualitative experience of heaven and what you do is directly proportional to the stewardship of your time, your gifts, and your money on earth. And so when you begin to develop a heart of compassion, and it gets soft, and then you get a generous spirit where God can just say, hey, I'd like you to do this. And by the way, I think he tests us sometimes. And I think sometimes, especially if he blesses you a lot, sometimes he taps you on the shoulder to do something really big, and it's a little scary. We were in the middle of in my former job, we were in the middle of a big campaign, and I heard God so clearly, and we were to give a 6-figure gift. I'd never given anything like that before. Well, and the only way for us to do it was take it out of our retirement. And that's not really great business sense. But I heard God specifically, and I talked to Teresa, and she kind of looked at me like, I really trust you, but I hope you really heard really well. And I said, honey, it's easy. I'm teaching on this. It's real easy to start talking about stuff in ways, and our life's more comfortable now, and our kids are through school, and this and that. And so are we trusting our retirement? Do we have like these formulas, and here's the finish line, and and here's our percentages, and our financial planner's got this all right out? Or do we trust God? I mean, have we just kind of got into, oh yeah, practically we do this, but really what we're really trusting is, unless we have these numbers, and everybody has a number, by the way, your security number. I personal conversation with a guy who told me, when it gets under 500 million, I just have to really slow down. You laugh. What's your number? What's your number? It's as ridiculous, your number is as ridiculous as his. Because what it says is, if I have a number, then, so I was a little fearful, but I was fearful when I gave $5, but it was pretty easy to give $5. A 6-figure gift, it was a little scary. But it was like, so can God not replenish that? Well, you know what? He's taking care of us. Here's what I want you to understand. The enemy is not playing around. There is a world system that is feeding your lies and me lies and telling you that the real way to happiness is stuff and status and position and power and what you have and what you drive and how much security you have. And I'm telling you, it's a lie. You need to be wise with your money. You need to be as wise about what you save and how you invest as what you give. But if you develop a compassionate heart and a generous spirit, and then if you make this link that giving is a spiritual issue. Giving is telling God, I actually believe it's yours, and I'm going to demonstrate that by giving you the first portion. And I actually believe whatever's left over is yours, that you can do with whatever at any time, because I'm made for eternity, and you promise you'll take care of me. Paul said, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Later, he's going to say, my God will supply all your needs. At the very end, the apostle, after talking us about this silent assailant, he gives them some very practical ways to sort of kill the greed or the carbon monoxide in their soul. Notice in 1 Timothy 6, verses 17 through 19, there's 2 very vivid commands. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant or put their hope in wealth. Why? Which is so uncertain. He said, don't be arrogant. Don't put your hope in wealth. I mean, we ought to know this, right? .com bus, right? Millionaire today, broke tomorrow. Don't put your hope in wealth. It's uncertain. But on God, and notice this, who richly supplies us with everything for our enjoyment. Please don't hear it's wrong to have nice stuff. Your priorities need to be in order, and then God blesses. He's a father, just like you want to give great birthday gifts, and you want to love your kids, and it's a graduation, and you want to give them something really special. That's how God feels about you. And when he gives you something nice, don't tell everyone, well, I got it on sale, or how about this? He gave it to me. I'm generous, he's generous. I have a pool because I like to swim. It's not for, baptisms for the youth group. I have a really big house because, we use it for ministry. I'm glad you use it for ministry. How about you have just a really nice house, you drive a really nice car, and God has really blessed you, and your priorities in order. If all that stuff is in debt, then get a life. He wants us to be radically sacrificial, but he wants us to radically enjoy. To drink deeply of life and joy and a great meal and a great vacation and whatever God provides. So he says, command those who are rich. By the way, that's all of us. And then he says, well, how do you do that? Command them to do good. Doing good that's not money. What is that? That's time. Be rich in good deeds. What's that? Those are actions. And be generous. That's with everything. and willing to share. That's money and stuff. In this way, here's the promise. You want to be happy? Really happy? In this way, they will lay up for themselves, circle for themselves. This isn't for someone else. They will lay up for themselves. God wants us to be generous and compassionate for our good. A firm foundation for the coming age. But notice this. And so they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Wow. The life that's truly life, you know what that is? That's called being happy, content. On the very back page, it says, here's the process, and we'll just take a couple minutes and close our time. I'd like you to kind of, this week, look around and respond, and that'll develop compassion. Okay? Just whatever. Just look around, see some needs, and just respond. Help some people. And then look within and release. That's generosity. That means some money is going to go from you to help some other people. You can do the little exercise I talked about. And then look up and rejoice. And that's worship. And that's where you say, God, I'm going to start giving the very first and best of my paycheck before I know anything else as an act of worship to you. Now, some of you are going, Chip, are you on drugs? Do you understand how much debt I have? Do you understand what would have to happen? Do you understand our budget? Do you understand the pressure? You know what? I don't. But I will say, we'll talk next week specifically about how to do some of this. But if you can take a baby step and begin trusting God, then ask yourself, what are some, quote, needs that are really wants? And ask yourself, do we really live on a budget? Do we really have clear priorities? And God will show you what to do.